All right. Um, Dear all, good evening, good morning from all the places that everyone's joined in from. I'm very glad that you've been able to join, and we would like to welcome you to the release of finally to the release of the book Conservation in the Indian City, Bridging the Gap, which has been a combined effort of all the people who've been involved over the last few years now. It is a culmination of efforts from experts and writers who are some of you are present here, and we're very grateful. INHAF and My Livable City are extremely glad to join in the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, which is being celebrated in India, which is the 75 years of independence in 2023. And we're glad to finally release our application. I am Ujjwala, a research associate at INHAF. I've been here since September. And even though I work on multiple projects here at INHAF, I've graduated from architecture school at PEP, and post which I did the urban fellowship program at IHS in Bangalore. Though I've had the pleasure and opportunity to work on this book and design it over the last few months. And I'm extremely grateful to all the three people who sort of put their trust and faith in me, Kirtee ji, Vinayak, and Poonam. And I'm very happy that everyone's been able to join. Our overall outline of the event is we'll first have Kirtee Shah introduce the book, post which we'll have the three panelists share their opinions and comments. And then we'll have the authors come in, share their feedback and comments. And then we'll have the two editors of the book give the closing comments. To briefly introduce both the publishers first, INHAF is an India-based non-profit established in 1999. It focuses on urban and rural housing for low-income groups, participatory planning, and inclusive development, poverty reduction, environmentally friendly cities, and sustainable development. It seeks to facilitate the impact potential of non-governmental actors in civil society towards creating better policies, programs, and institutions. MyLiveableCity is an India, Netherlands, US-based knowledge and research platform established in 2014, dedicated to the creation of inclusive and sustainable cities for all. Drawing on expertise from over 20 countries, it aims to inform, inspire, and educate through digital content, magazines, books, knowledge tools, expert training, conferences, short-term academic courses, and workshops. All right, let me now invite Kirtee Shah, the president of INHAF, to introduce the book and officially release it. Over to you, Kirtee ji.
Thank you, Ujjwala. Well, let me first thank all who are present here this evening. We're very, very grateful for making time for this event. We have been planning for quite some time. I'm especially grateful to the panelists, authors spread all over on the globe at this point of time. I'm not going to kind of introduce book in the manner of speaking that Ujjwala is saying. I'm going to talk about what happened behind the book, more or less, in making the book. And I'll just take a few minutes very quickly. And I have three tasks to perform. The first task is to thank those who made this book possible. That is the editors, the authors panelists, the designer, the printer, those who supported us, and of course, today's speakers. So that's my task in terms of thanking them. And let me first start thanking the editors. That is Vinayak Bharne and Poonam Mascarenhas. This, I must start by saying that without them, without that effort, this would have been absolutely impossible. They conceived the book. They managed 3 webinars with exceptional skills, and anyone who attended those webinars would know they were managed exceptionally well. They diligently followed up with authors, not only for the essays, they worked very hard They followed each detail in great depth. They read that the proof of the book. They supervised and guided the design of the book that was being done by Ujjwala and others. They obtained, they checked, they chose, selected, rejected photographs, and they went through every conceivable detail that is required to be done. And that is why I'm saying without them, without their effort, without their hard work, this book would have been absolutely impossible. So thank you very much, Vinay Bhai. Thank you very much, Poonamji. Thank you once again. Thank you. Then I'm grateful to the authors. They played double role. They first participated in the webinar and made the webinars very rich. And we had not one, we had 3 webinars. They also found time to write additional essays which were required by the editors. What is interesting, and I must thank them for that, they did that in time, not only quality, they did that in time. And they did a superb job of those essays which they were requested to do. So that is why I must thank the authors all over again. Thank you very much for being at the webinar. Thank you also for the essays, doing them very well, doing them in time. My third thanks goes to the designer, my young colleague, Ujjwala Krishnan, who introduced to begin with. When we handed over the job to design this book, she had barely joined us in INHAF. She had just joined us to work with us. She was not even supposed to work on the work. She was supposed to work on construction, women construction workers program. We handed over the responsibility. They accepted the responsibility fully, and they did a splendid, splendid job beyond her years, beyond her experience. And I know very well that was more than what she had expected. I also know that it was tougher than they thought it would be. Still, she went through it and she produced a remarkably interesting international style book. So even though she's my colleague and we meet every day, I must thank Ujjwala for this terrific job. I must also thank the fourth entity to be thanked is, and I think she's not here, Mita Ben, who printed this book. Mita and I think, go together for the last 30 years. Whatever we have done, whatever we have printed, Mita has printed it. And believe me or not, whether I have money or not, I hand it over her to print. And if I don't have money, she finds money to get it printed. We've never had problem of getting it printed. She is, I think, rich enough to put in money if I don't have enough money, but it really gets done. And that's very, very important. My fifth thanks are for those who helped us financially. As a matter of fact, I go on saying that this, in a manner of speaking, is a no-cost book. Only money was spent is on printing. That too, I was telling someone, 1/3 of what it would otherwise cost somewhere else. And we had 2 supporters for this printing of the book. One was the Miserio, which is supporting our work for the last 15 years almost, a German development support organization. And of course, MyLiveableCity from Netherlands. In fact, MyLiveableCity came in when we run out of money because the size has increased, the number of the pages had increased, the costs had increased, and then MyLiveableCity came in, and they said, "Don't worry, we'll support you." So, with all the help that we had from all these people, we were able to make this book possible and deliver in your hands. And my last thank, I think, before we move for one more minute to something else, I must also thank today's 3 speakers, One is Smita ji, Smita Datta, Makhija ji, Trudi Sandmeier, and Edgar Ribeiro. Edgar is an old friend, I think, for about 50 years, and I'm very delighted that he's here today to kind of, launch this book. Let me just take one more minute to tell you about the webinar series through which this book has been printed. This webinar series we are running for last 2 years. It's on one subject called Rethinking City. And in fact, it is largely rethinking Indian cities. We by now have done 85 webinars. We intend continue doing this. Our plan is to do 150 webinars. We already dealt with 30 to 35 themes and sub-themes on what is needed to change in the Indian cities. And it is in that context that we did 3 webinars with Vinay ji and Poonam ji, and plan in such a way so that the outcome is a book, and it happened. I also must tell you before I end my introductory thing that we are so impressed with what we have done with the book that has come out that we're planning 2 more books. We already have found 2 editors like Vinayak ji and Poonam ji, and our next book will be on urban economy. And it is going to be done by 2 professors who are working with us for quite some time. So with that sort of introduction, and I'm not saying a word about the book, I've read it twice already. It's superb. And all of you are there to kind of talk about the book. So I'm not saying anything. This is what happened behind the scene, which not many will know. And I thought it was very important that you know what happened behind the scene. And that is why with that, back to Ujjwala to continue the evening. And thank you very much for everyone being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirtee ji. I think, yes, knowing what the story behind the book is always extremely important and illuminating, so to say. All right, I would like to now call upon the 3 panelists to share their thoughts on the book. First, I'd like to invite Smita of Avicenna to speak. She is a partner at Avicenna, and heritage revitalization has been her passion since she graduated with a master's degree from the Institute of Advanced Architectural Studies from York in 1986. She's been committed to making conservation the foremost priority in both urban and rural India. She has worked on heritage conservation projects in Delhi, Rajasthan, Ladakh, Assam, and Uttarakhand. Her projects were driven by processes where solutions have been based on an in-depth understanding of local identity, continuity of the shared heritage components, sustenance of sensitive ecosystems, and socio-economic regeneration factors. Smita, over to you.
Thank you, Ujjwala. I want to first start by congratulating Poonam and Vinayak for conceiving this publication to fill the gap in our understanding of what our country's journey for its rich heritage has been, and for finding ways to ensure that its significance is enhanced and make it meaningful to communities that inhabit it along with the custodians. Many special thanks to INHAF and MyLiveableCity for providing a platform for these ideas to be collated and shared through this beautiful square book. To place the book in context, conservation and the Indian city bridging the gap, I would like to draw your attention to a history of conservation of the Western world from Renaissance to mid-20th century by Yuka Yukiletto. In this 1986 publication, heritage was looked at from the perspective of monuments, which were considered dead, and the living built heritage, which was still inhabited. Heritage was viewed in compartments of natural, built, and intangible. We have come a long way from that point, and the current book takes through the journey of conservation professionals, emphasizing the need to approach heritage as one cohesive whole to ensure its sustainability in an ecological, responsible way. This book will be of value to professionals, students, and custodians of Indian heritage who wish to understand how to create a balance between heritage conservation and development. In the global forum, it will stand to inform the conservation community that India's profession of conservation consultants has come of age, and we now have a body of work to share with the world, which will contribute in further shaping the principles, ethics, and methods of working in heritage ecospheres. At this juncture, I would like to remind you that the Delhi Declaration on Heritage and Democracy 2017 was adopted by the State Party India. It reflected the commitment by ICOMOS to heritage and democracy as the key ingredient in people-based approach to sustainable development. Heritage is a fundamental right and responsibility of all. It is a starting point for a meaningful and equitable future that secures and celebrates diversity, social engagement, equality, and justice for all cultures. 26 authors in this book go on to tackle the difficult task of showing how they have strived, in spite of the odds, to give our heritage resource the place it deserves. The book covers experiences from the length and breadth of our country. If time had permitted, I would have liked to highlight the essence of each paper because the journeys are so diverse and the learnings from each of the experiences so meaningful to help charter the future courses of action. The papers on the future of the 20th century architecture in Indian cities makes us grapple with the question of how to establish the significance of the designed, not so old masterpieces made in the 20th century, worthy of conservation for its intrinsic value, and save them from real estate economic pressures. The iconic 20th century buildings like IIM Ahmedabad, Hall of Nations at Pragati Maidan, the Chanakya Cinema in Delhi, and the urban planning masterpieces like Chandigarh serve to be the starting point of the losing battle, to tell us that there's a serious flaw in the way we value our heritage resource, especially in the context of the value embodied in them. The state and the city planning authorities need to be held accountable for contributing to the carbon emissions by not recognizing that every existing building is a carbon neutral resource. In the name of development and ease of working with concrete, 1 ton of carbon dioxide is produced for every 2 tons of concrete poured. Mumbai boasts of 500 years of natural, cultural, and architectural heritage. The declaration of the Victorian Gothic and Art Deco ensembles of Mumbai as a World Heritage Site in 2018 has given a boost to conservation of its legacy of architecture and historic public spaces. The politics of selective erasure of history is addressed by the authors of this section. Only raising the level of scholarship of the professionals, the academia, and the government officials can change the scenario. Questions of large-scale alterations to the natural features of the city are raised, like the Sabarmati Riverfront Development Project that turned the river into a canal in Ahmedabad, and what the coastal road does to the Queen's Necklace in Mumbai. 20th century experimented with new materials and engineering solutions. Structures with reinforced porous brick, bat, lime concrete, or pre-stressed concrete girder bridges are a challenge to restore. The fabric serves as a memory of evolution of technological advancements and requires research to conserve it. The large-scale transformation of the Central Vista in Delhi has raised many debates with respect to the value what the historic urban landscape will lose with the interventions planned. Social values need to be understood better, and transformations to such valuable heritage assets need to stem from an in-depth knowledge of urban planning, heritage conservation, sustenance of ecosystems, and the relationship of the place with the people. The next section questions India's World Heritage Cities and Living Sites. Quo vadis? Where are you going? A difficult question for any professional or stakeholder. 9 authors have put forth the experiences with respect to documentation, making nomination dossiers, and conservation management plans. Change is the only constant was my initial response of reading the first few papers. But then strategies for managing change emerged, and I had to rethink where we were going. The technological advancement in the digital documentation and data analysis can change the way we operate completely. We have to make the move. Quoting from the Delhi Declaration again, it is our duty to conserve the significance of the multicultural, multidimensional heritage resources we have inherited and hand them down to the following generations, engaging and training new generations in the understanding and protection of the inherited values of our living and shared heritage will sustain the plural legacies of the past. Case studies from Jaipur, Ahmedabad, Nizamuddin Basti in Delhi, Kashi Vishwanath in Varanasi, Kathmandu, and Liverpool are shared. The need for local communities' involvement in making management plans is voiced. Success stories are told, failures are acknowledged. This equips the reader to chart their own course for the city they are responsible for conserving, revitalizing, making it livable and resilient. Here, I would like to mention that the nomination dossier for Delhi's imperial capital cities lies like a coffee table book. To quote from the Economic Times, August 5th, 2015, the government has taken a decision to withdraw the nomination of Delhi as a UNESCO World Heritage City in view of the restrictions in carrying out infrastructure works in the national capital after the city comes into the heritage list. Is there a fear that the World Heritage status will impose restrictions, or have decisions already been made to create interventions which will violate heritage-sensitive guidelines? In Kathmandu, 2015 Godka earthquake stresses on the need for traditional technology and materials to be understood for seismic resilient structures. It is the living urban heritage that retains the memory of the city. Training needs to be put in place for intergenerational knowledge and skill transfer. Japan, as we know, lists people embodying historic skills as state treasures. Part 3 takes us through conservation, regulation, and urban planning. We have Professor E.F.N. Ribeiro on our panel. He is best qualified to speak about this section. I've been fortunate to learn from him the strength of the master plans, zonal plans, and local area plans to shape a city. 8 authors have shared their views on the regulatory framework and impacts on the historic settlements of Greater Bombay, Pune, Delhi, Hyderabad, Kolkata, Bhubaneswar, and Goa. The process of formulating policy, law, and regulations needs a vision to view the heritage and its inhabitants as an invaluable, irreplaceable resource. The next step is to document and analyze data with multidisciplinary teams. Based on heritage impact studies, strategies, and priorities for intervention can be generated. Government bodies can benefit hugely by institutional collaborations to do this work in a scientific manner. Government bodies themselves violate due processes for seeking mandatory heritage transformation approvals, thereby setting a terrible example for the land mafia and the real estate giants. At the Shivaji terminus, the Central Railways were not willing to consult the Heritage Committee for permissions, as it was projected that it could take at least 2 years for the process, and were very apprehensive about the outcome. At Chandni Chowk, the Delhi government did not put the redevelopment plans through the planning permit process. DUAC approval was not sought prior to implementation. Legal intervention was taken as a recourse to make the government withdraw and modify its inappropriate proposal. Heritage economics is an equally strong player as legislation. The authors emphasize that this must work in hand with legislation, which has to be site-specific to the heritage. It must consider the strengths and needs of the local communities. To have a body of professionals to make this level of analysis and legislation, we have to address education in the multidisciplinary fields of architectural conservation, town planning, urban design, structural design, heritage management, heritage economics, and others. Institutional connects have to be made to bring the learning from practice to the academia and the law-making bodies. To conclude, starting from change is the only constant, the search for the direction of change, the possibility of achieving what we defined as a goal, interacting with co-professionals and redefining our processes to achieve the goals, and then sharing the journey to draw strength from each other is what traveling with these authors have taught me. The book itself will become a treasure for the next generation who have not had the first-hand learning from the pioneers of conservation in this country. We learned from the best, Sir Bernard Fielden, Martin Singh, Shyam Chenani, Jitinder Pal Singh, B.K. Thapar, Kapila Vatsa, and Pupul Jaikar, and many more. Their spirit lives through this book and through all of us. The concluding remarks of the book show the way forward and is a must read and a must imbibe. Thanks again to the organizers for having me on this platform.
Thank you so much, Smita, for your very kind words and illuminating words. I would now like to invite Trudi Sandmeier to speak about the book and share her thoughts. Trudi is the Director of Graduate Programs in Heritage Conservation and an Associate Professor of Practice in Architecture at the University of Southern California. She holds a BA in History from the University of California and an MA in Historic Preservation Planning from Cornell. She began teaching at USC in 2003 and since 2011 has served as a full-time faculty member and program director. Previously, from 2000 to 2011, she worked for the Los Angeles Conservancy, the largest local historic preservation nonprofit in the US. She also co-founded and currently serves as president of the nonprofit Will Rogers Ranch Foundation, dedicated to the ongoing restoration, rehabilitation, and preservation of Will Rogers State Historic Park. Her work centers on the conservation of the recent past and efforts to make visible the impact of underrepresented constituencies on the historic built environment. Over to you, Trudi.
Good morning, everyone, or good evening, as the case may be. Thank you so much for having me as part of this discussion and panel. And I wanted to say congratulations, first off, for achieving this book. It's always hard to put these things together and to herd the cats, to make all of these pieces come together at the same time. And I'm really delighted to be able to share my thoughts on the outcome of this work. I was struck by a lot of things, and when I was reading this book, I've now read it sort of 1.5 times. I went back to a few of the essays to read them again, and I was struck by a couple of different ideas that really jumped out at me as someone who is both teaching in this field and practicing. And the first is that this is a book that's not just about Indian heritage. And I think that there are lessons and thoughts and ideas that are put forward here that are globally relevant. And I think this is a contribution to the literature of our field that's being produced, and an important, aspect that we all should be thinking about. And one of the courses that I teach is a reading course where we read complete texts and discuss them. It's sort of a dorky book club, for lack of a better term, where we really dig in and try and think about these things more holistically. And this is going to be a great addition to my next course, which I'm excited about, because I think it brings a whole series of voices together to talk about different aspects of a very complicated and extremely complex set of issues that are globally relevant. So that was one thing I kept thinking was, oh my gosh, everybody has to read this book. I think there were a few other ideas that really jumped out at me when I was reading. One is the idea that, I spend a lot of time I'm from Los Angeles originally. I'm here now as a practitioner and as an educator, and it really is a 20th century city. And so the context of 20th century conservation is my everyday. And one of the things that I'm struck by is the idea that that the voice of the vernacular 20th century is maybe not as highlighted in the conversation, and I think that's one of the things that we are grappling with, certainly here, in the context of how do we expose the heritage of all of the people of our cities and our urban areas. How do we tell the story of not just the sort of dominant high income communities within our various spheres, but the lives of everyday people, and what does that mean, and how is that important, and how does it, it is arguably the thing that shapes our cities the most, and how do we tell that story as well? And I think several of the authors sort of surfaced that in their comments, and it was one of the things that I kept coming back to as I was reading. Ultimately, I think, I'll just highlight a few other things that have really stuck in my head as I've been thinking about the book. Certainly as I was, drinking my tea this morning and getting ready to have this conversation, these were the things swirling around in my head. One of the authors talked about managing continuity, and I really liked that idea about, we talk about managing change. That is a frequent mantra in our educational approach and in the conversations that we're having. And this idea of managing continuity flips that a little bit. And it made me think like, well, is that really true? Is that something that we're doing? Is it about continuity, or is it about change? And I'm not sure I have the answer, but I think that was very provocative. And I'm going to continue to think about that a little bit. It might change a few of my lectures going forward. We'll see. Obviously, conservation is an inherently political act. And I think that's something that the reality of politics and the idea of the fact that it's also a very local activity, even though the context of a lot of the essays that were written were about World Heritage Conventions and how that shapes the way that conservation is viewed. It is, in fact, I think, very much it comes down to local governance and how that's managed at a municipal or local level, community level. And so I feel like that's something that feels like it needs to be elevated in the conversation a little bit, because it's really where the power lies in most communities. And so that was another idea that kind of struck me as I was reading. Obviously, the relevance and importance of the conversation regarding climate change and its impacts on our heritage going forward cannot be in any way diminished or minimized. It is in many ways going to be the dominant conversation, not just in heritage conservation, obviously, but in much broader conversation. But how do we remain relevant in the face of what is going to be global systemic changes that are needed? And relevance, I think, is a through line throughout all of these conversations. How are we relevant in the context of people who are looking for water security, who are looking for food security, who are looking for shelter, who are looking for all of these other needs? And how do we integrate our practice as conservation professionals into these very fundamental questions that we as societies are grappling with. And I think that is the challenge of our time in terms of how we move forward as a discipline. I talk a lot with my students about heritage justice, about the idea that that we need to celebrate the histories of all of our communities, of all of the different constituencies that make up our urban environments. I often will say that in the United States, one of the we have our National Register of Historic Places, which is our national list of historic sites, and it is absolutely unbalanced. There are virtually no women represented on this list. It's largely a list of sites significant to wealthy white men. And that is, that's a challenge that we are grappling with. And so I would say that this idea of, elevating the conversation beyond the sort of iconic monument and the sites associated with great economic wealth are also one of the large challenges of our time. It's easy to point to the iconic building, to the monument, to those things, and sort of celebrate that. It's much harder and much more complex to think about these things from a local and community level, the sort of top-down versus bottom-up situation that was discussed in several of the essays as well. And then I would just say that this was a short but really potent book, which I also appreciated. The fact that these essays were sort of chunks that I could digest and think about. I really appreciated that. Sometimes I get lost in the blizzard of words, and this was a concise and digestible set of pieces, particularly for someone who isn't as familiar with some of the specific places. I have had the privilege of visiting India only once and only briefly. And so the context of some of these, I haven't been able to be there in person. I don't know what it is, but I felt like I could understand. I think the authors did a really nice job of communicating some of the issues that were very specific to the individual places that they were talking about. I also really appreciated that there were dissenting voices, that it wasn't just a chorus of hooray for heritage. I liked that there were people who pushed back and poked a sharp stick at some of the things that we do. I'm not sure that it was fully resolved, honestly. I think there was a sort of, people were laid out some things that were dissenting voices, and then it kind of got left there, and I wanted to argue back. So so maybe that's also good. That's a provocation for a reader to think about, because not everybody thinks that conservation is important or relevant. And I think that that's an important thing that we need to remember as conservation professionals, is that not everyone has the same platform to evaluate what we do. So I have obviously this is a much less structured and formal approach to this, but these were some of the things that I really felt came out of this. It made me think. It made me want to come to India. It made me think, really compare what I'm grappling with here on a daily basis to some of the challenges, and how both similar they are in so many ways, and yet how the context of the local communities in which this work is happening is so specific to the parts of the world in which you find it. So I'm grateful for being included. I feel privileged to have been able to share my thoughts in this fashion, and I look forward to the continuing discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Trudi. I think that was a very interesting set of perspectives you brought out from your reading of the book. I would now like to invite Edgar Ribeiro to briefly introduce him. I don't think, though, that is needed. He's very well known to all of us here. He is the former Chief Planner, Town and Country Planning Organization of the Government of India. He has been a strong and vocal advocate for sustainable and people-centric planning methods in development. He believes that development has to be through a system dedicated to sustainability and from a bottom-up approach. Edgar, over to you.
Thank you. I'll first give you my brief take on the publication. I'm reading this out. I'm honored this evening to join my distinguished co-panelists for views on this timely publication, jointly conceptualized, curated, and edited from Goa, a conservation architect, Poonam Mascarenhas, and from California, by Professor Vinayak Bharne, for the Ahmedabad-based INHAF, designed by the citizen-focused urbanist Dr. Kirtee Shah, and the Netherlands-based MyLiveableCity, as globally disseminated by Professor Sham Khandekar. Through 3 subtly integrated sessions, the studied views and experiences of 26 established drivers of conserving the natural and man-made heritage and their surrounds, despite frequent and tangential interventions by stroke through the powers that be, makes this publication epoch-making. At various times during the past few decades, I've had the privilege of interacting with the promoters, editors, and several of the eminent contributors of this volume. And needless to say, I've learned a lot from this collective wisdom. My take is that the experts seem to converge in asking, quo vadis, India's vast and irreplaceable heritage, and pointedly stating that what are we handing over to our future generations in an era of rapid and unpredictable climate change? From several of the views, it is refreshing to note the growing support concerns of UNESCO and its several arms like ECOMOS and ICROM, so as to nudge signatory nations like India into overdue and corrective actions on a subject recognized as being sovereign. I now ask, what is the Indian context for a way forward? India, with the 7th largest land mass in the world, and already the most populous, has the worst land-man ratio of all large nations. Barely 0.39 hectares per capita versus 1.6 hectares in China and 4.8 hectares in the USA. So we have no time. Therefore, land is a scarce resource, getting scarcer by the day, with multiple demands on an increasing number of critical urban land parcels. To help in addressing this issue, we have, through the 73rd, 74th Amendment of 1992, the Constitution Act of India, gravitated to a down-top participatory process on the use of scarce land. The canvas has now been institutionalized through contiguous electoral wards. I use the word electoral wards, each under accountable panchayats, rural and municipal corporators, stroke councillors, urban, of panchayats, municipal corporations, councils, urban local bodies, mandated to laterally and not hierarchically interact with the center state drivers of the economy through parliament assemblies of the nation. My stress is on the accountability of the panchayats and not on their powers, and also that any sort of interaction has to be lateral and not hierarchical, as it is happening today. Therefore, a spatial context for sustainable development has now emerged in India as the legally enabling mantra. Thus, from the expansive central, concurrent, and state legislative list, it is only the Urban and Regional Development Planning Acts on the state list, and which specifies on how land can be used and at what intensities. It's not just how land can be used, but at what intensities, FAR, setbacks, and so on. That is recognized by the courts of law. This is due to its inbuilt statutory participatory process, objections and suggestions. Often the courts ask, where is it shown on the development plan? If it is not shown on the development plan, it is not heritage, but it is shown on the heritage, on the archaeological map. But that is not recognized in a court of law. Accordingly, each state, union territory with legislature of the union is expected to now provide spatial platforms and without geographic overlaps, comprising of 3 levels. The broad brush regional plans for all its urban and rural districts as guides to development plans for all the municipalities and panchayats, all of which are to facilitate the local area plans for all their electoral wards, either under municipal corporations or councillors, if for urban, or under panchayats, or under panchayats, where all land requirements to defer to different departments of government are decimated through a time-bound process. There's been a subtle change in India. If we are no longer looking at village versus town, pre-independence, we're no longer looking at urban versus rural, or even an urban-rural continuum in the planning process after independence, but we're looking at an interplay, an integrated interplay between panchayats and municipalities. Needless to say, the down-top participatory process is under continual challenge from the top-down, center-state drivers of economic growth. In this mismatch, heritage is a major loser through very low priority for federal funds. However, with growing citizen interests in the varied forms of heritage and with boosts through authoritative publications as the one before us this evening, all is not lost. Within this, within this constitutional savvy context, I'll briefly highlight some of the positives which I envisage as emerging primarily through legalized spatial plans. My envisaged positive takeaways from this publication are as follows. At the outset, we need to be clear that in the federated Indian context, heritage is either natural or man-made, and that man-made is either immovable built or immovable artifacts. That natural heritage is in the concurrent list for conservation, namely new uses within heritage spaces, where the center legislates and the states of the union supplements. Likewise, man-made heritage is also in the concurrent list through the Archaeological Survey of India for legislation, but not for conservation, for preservation stroke protection, namely like prolonging decay. In both forms, it is the land that is identified for conservation protection. This is a very common mistake made because they're very clear. You have to identify the land, and it is the land which has definite survey numbers of the land revenue codes all across India. With man-made heritage, under irreversible stress, the Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Sites and Remains Act of 1958 has been amended and validated in 2010 to cater to no development buffers of 100 meters minimum, round protected sites, and a further regulated buffer 200 meters minimum round the no development belt for conservation regulations through a newly created National Monuments Authority. Also, states of the Union were and are advised to have similar upgrades. There are different ways they're doing it. Not all of them have brought such legislative changes. The next point is that due to budgetary constraints in general and sectoral development compulsions in particular, sites from the well-crafted heritage laws reduce the minimum as with a man-made heritage. As a relief, and based on the 1995 Heritage Conservation List for Mumbai, under the Maharashtra Urban and Regional Development Act of 1966, heritage as part of a development process is now possible across the states of India, even as the constitutionally supported special context is being increasingly bombarded by and through the top-down drivers of economic growth outside a sustainable context. So though the heritage laws in India are precise, but it only has a limited application. And what has happened now is that through the town planning acts, it's possible to increase the heritage list based on the Bombay experience. My brief views on a few presentations and in which I've had involvement in some form or the other are as below. The first important point I would like to raise, local area plans for electoral wards, the Delhi experience. This was promoted by Mr. Tejinder Khanna when he was Lieutenant Governor of Delhi sometime in the 2000s. This constitutes a key platform for legalizing heritage conservation stroke preservation. The pilot exercises of the 2000s for the MCD electoral wards are replicable, even if elected councillors aimed its demise due to loss of plot regulatory powers. Professor A.G.K. Menon was a key player in this exercise through Intact Delhi chapter along with Anipal Lopez in the team. With SPA Delhi, Jamia Millia University, IP University and AMDA being the other players. So we had several key areas shown how these local area plans could be prepared, where all the ethics could be mapped up front so that as a people participative process. It worked quite well for a while. As a major takeaway, the ASI accepted the recognition of their regulatory protection agenda through clauses in the DDA Act and now across India to the State Town Planning Acts. I still remember until that point of time, the ASI said it's not our job, please don't come to us. When we used to send our team to get information, they used to chase them off. But when we said, let's try something, let's do their homework and put it on the plan. But because this exercise was given a strong push through the Lieutenant Governor, I immediately got a call from the Director General of the ASI saying, Mr. Ribeiro, what you have shown is wrong. I said, thank you. I was waiting for you to tell me that. I know it is wrong. But remember, if you don't correct it, my views will prevail because the law says that is what the law says. And it is from that point of time that ASI really got into the act of cooperating, as there are so many such experiences based on that. The second is local area plans for wards incorporating the Humayun tomb and Nizamuddin Basti. I'm quoting this as the next important experience of how heritage can be handled with all the problems we face in India. This, the Aga Khan promoted exercise through conservation architect Ratish Nanda, is replicable in both its heritage and Basti upliftment development contexts. In fact, it was not only the Nizamuddin monument, which was, of course, a World Heritage Site, but in a plan, he was able to show 16 to 17 other national protected monuments in this area. And most important, the Basti rehabilitation scheme. And it did so much for the local people in that area. It's been one of the most significant areas where work can be done on a down-top process, provided the push is correct. Currently, it is the only one of the 3 approved projects by the National Monuments Authority under the 2010 Amendment and Validation Act. The others, I think, is Suneri Bagh in Delhi and somewhere in Lucknow. But it's amazing, of the 3,000 odd protected monuments we have got where AMA rules apply, there's none yet been approved through this process. It shows that the interest in getting it done is not very good. Push is not good enough. The third area which I would now like to stress on is the 1995 Heritage Conservation List for Greater Bombay Municipal Corporation under the Maharashtra Regional and Urban Development Planning Act. This pioneering exercise of 1966 by the late Sham Chanani of the Bombay Environmental Action Group and his team of conservationists with Teta Panjit and Devi Goenka as key members has opened up heritage conservation opportunities for precincts and sites all over India, notably Hyderabad, Ahmedabad, and Lucknow. I was involved in this because from the central government has to visit Maharashtra, and the state government said, is this possible to do under the Town Planning Acts? And we said, of course it is possible without a change in the act. And that is exactly what we did. The Bombay experience was good. It was the pioneering one. Bombay was not a very old city. Most of the buildings which were retained were hardly 100, 200 years old of British origin. But in Hyderabad, Ahmedabad, and Lucknow, the situation was a lot different. The opposition to this exercise really came because the exercise by Sham and company was too enthusiastic. There were too many entries, and a lot of architects felt that their building projects were being affected. And second is, many of the builders did not like the curbing of FARs. This became a very huge issue. It is still a very contentious issue, especially in Bombay, which is only marginally on the archaeological radar. Another part of this, I would like to refer to the list for Goa. This was pushed by Administrator Jagdish Chandar in 1970s. And a lot of more than 180 to 200 units are listed there. This was picked up in the draft RPG, Regional Plan for Goa 21. It was ignored by the final RPG of 21 for some reason, and again revived only in the 2010 Building Regulations Act, which is neither here nor there as far as land use is concerned. And I must also refer, as it is in Goa, the comprehensive list of over 700 entries of Panaji by conservation architect Poonam Mascarenhas for the City Corporation of Panjim is not yet meaningfully processed, and it needs being accelerated. But what is missing is it has to be done through ward corporators. That means the local area plans have to show, because if it is related to the local area plans, then you can identify full heritage wards and you can identify other LAP benchmarks. So all these things are possible. The fourth experience which I would like to refer to is of the Chandigarh Capital Complex as a World Heritage Site. Radiating from this iconic site, the 20th century designed city was by the students of the Chandigarh College of Architecture. They have identified several heritage footprints from the 20th century of Corbusier. This exercise, led by Professor Sangeeta Baga Mehta, has now stressed on the regulated growth to the Chandigarh Interstate Metropolitan Regional Plan. This is a very important take, because if people wanted Chandigarh to be shown as a heritage city and all the footprints to be protected, but there was no control on the growth of Chandigarh, so you had to look at the regional context. And this the regional context to what we call the Chandigarh Interstate Metropolitan Regional Plan ensures that all new growths are pushed away from Chandigarh. Something similar is happening in NCR. If you want to show heritage in Delhi, make sure that the rush to Delhi is controlled, and the 22 district NCR plan is helping to get that done. All these metropolitan regional plans are helping in that extent in controlling the grade of the larger metropolitan regions, notably Mumbai, Calcutta, Chennai, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Ahmedabad, Lucknow, Surat, Jaipur, so as to better address heritage issues. This is working quite well, and it's all interrelated because the platform to make heritage works can work.
I think we need to conclude, Edgar, because people are gradually beginning to leave. I think they have to leave. We'd appreciate some concluding remarks.
I just finished with Professor Sangamitra Basu has also been effectively addressing this issue through IIT Kharagpur, Calcutta, Patna, Bhubaneswar, for regulating heritage within a spatial context. Finally, there are several pro-heritage takeaways from each of the learned presentation statements of the experts anchors of this compilation. To me, the single factor that can ruin a heritage agenda is, I'm using this term, FAR, out of context. Hitherto, our historic settlement codes have functioned best with a cap of roughly of an FAR of 1.5 or 150. Beyond that, it clearly becomes a case of heritage versus development, and naturally, heritage loses out. Upfront legalized mapping is therefore paramount for public support. Currently, the top-down machinery are perceived to consciously thwart this process. Heritage therefore needs this constitutionally recognized spatial anchor. The challenge is on. So it is not frustrating. There are possibilities. And I think from publications like this, we have a great way forward in the supporting heritage to see it works. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edgar. I would like to now call upon Gustavo, who's joined in as well. Gustavo F. Arauz has written the foreword to the book, and he's an architect whose career has focused on the management and conservation of the historic built environment. Now retired, his private practice included heritage consulting services for the US Departments of the Interior and State, UNESCO, the cities of Buenos Aires, Chicago, and Madrid, and the governments of Barbados, El Salvador, and Paraguay. A former faculty member of the graduate program in historic preservation at the University of Pennsylvania, his public service includes 3 terms as president of the International Council on Monuments and Sites, ICOMOS. Gustavo, if you're here, I would like you to please briefly share your views on the book.
Well, thank you very much for having me and for inviting me to write the foreword to this important book, which I have not read in its fullness yet, because I only got it a few days ago. And I don't have my camera on because I'm in the process of donating my library, and my office is in a state of absolute disaster. But anyway, I just want to say that I was very impressed by the book and by its content. It's like you have gathered a lot of views that are like the tessera that will be used to build a mosaic, and that mosaic will probably reflect what the conditions that you want in order to achieve the level of preservation that you need for modern cities. I have to say that one of the things that I have emphasized throughout my later career is contradict something that Trudi said earlier, that sometimes it's hard to find things to preserve, and that the community doesn't want to preserve anything. I have never met a community that didn't want to preserve something, and I think the challenge is to go to the community and to walk them through it. And a lot of times what you will find is that first you will discover its intangible heritage elements in the urban area that are important. I know that the challenges that you face are universal, but they're particularly difficult for India because you may not realize it, because you live with it every day and you were born into it. But India's built heritage is so vast and important that, of course, it's twice as difficult for you to preserve your heritage, your built heritage, as it is for other countries, because you have just so much and it's so valuable. I'm a great admirer and fan of Indian heritage. I think my only recommendation would be this: that you deal with community, that you emphasize community, because those may be the tessera that may be missing to build your plan. It's always an uphill battle, no matter where you live. But as I just said, for Indians, I think the climb is much steeper and much more difficult for so many reasons. You also have a huge population, you have a huge territory, and there are so many things to preserve there that you may never have all the resources that you need. But I have to say that having been to India in the past, I am always amazed at the level of achievements that you have in terms of conserving your heritage. So in that sense, I congratulate you. And I think the fact that you undertook this book is part of that effort, is an example of the Indian desire and umph to move ahead. So with that, I will just limit myself to that. And I remain at your, even though I'm a retired old man that maybe has little to contribute, I remain at your service if you ever need me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gustavo. Thank you also for joining in. I would like to now open it up to the gathered authors. We have a total of 26 authors who have contributed to the book. but unfortunately, some of them have not been able to join. I'd like to invite Professor Basu, Professor Ranaji, Dennis, and Brindaji to share their comments first. Anybody can go first. Ranaji, would you like to begin?
Okay, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. So I have not followed any principles and rules of conservation or preservation, but simply involved my whole life for documentation and then trying to make public aware about the heritage. In that way, the case is different, that we face problem, two basic problem we face. The one thing is there is nothing like directly heritage law that can be used for only cities like Varanasi. This is one thing. Second thing is that public participation is zero. Let me say zero in a sense, because they talk a lot, but they were never part of this one. This is the second thing. The third thing we are facing for such cities, that how to maintain the integrity or balance when you are talking about the bridging the gap. So old tradition and the new tradition. In the case of Varanasi, Kashi Vishwanath corridors. So now so many ancient small shrines and images, about 42, I have counted all these, that lost, and many of them not re-established in proper manner. A big wall has been created. Now all that roots gone. So how to just make an adjustment that they can be alive. So when we are taking this idea, continuity of the tradition, then use of the tradition in modern context, and then we are talking about the sustainable development for the future. So I think heritage cities like Varanasi, I am typically citing, that face too much problem. This is one thing. Second thing is that still there is nothing like proper documentation of Varanasi. There's not a single book or two books or three books we can say that all these are documented out of about 2,000 temples that based on ancient textual tradition and mapping, etc. So that is another problem. And the last thing will be that all these things, what will be the economic gain for and how people will adjust. I can say only one example is here. When now Vishwanath corridor has opened, so now according to government data, every day 5,500,000 people are visiting this. I don't think this is real data. If you can set all that 500,000 people in the compound of that, even the ant can't sit there. So that is the false propaganda. But on the other hand, what happened? What we local people are feeling that it is far outside, inside we've gone. Now all the drama is going on, young people are coming and they are enjoying. That's like leisure recreation. There is a spirituality, there is a cultural sense. So that is another big treat. So I don't know how to just, maybe this is my pain. So I have felt that you all people can help us to know the middle path. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranaji. How about Kirtee Ramananji? Would you like to go next? Or Professor Basu, are you here? I hope I'm audible, Vinayak.
Yeah. Yes, Sushruta. Dennis, maybe you want to go ahead. I see that your mic is.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Oh, thank you for giving me the opportunity. And it has been very good to hear again to all the experts and especially Professor Ribeiro. And working in Calcutta now after retirement, when working with the thing, I feel that each of the cities, each of the place in India has a very different story to tell. And the solution should come from there only within an overall guideline. Working in NMA in the first, when we are the members, we know that it is that notional 100 and 200 meter, that is really not working. we need a very contextual, context-specific, community-level approach where not the built heritage, but the community plays a very important role. And I really like the word, it's not a management of change, but the management of continuity, what should continue another. Where the people are very important because most of these areas are owned by private people. And so it becomes a fight between the development and conservation, if you look at it that way. But people, and there are solutions, there are alternatives. What we fail to see, or what we as a planners need to see, that show through the various example and demonstration projects, what this book has also tried to achieve in a very interesting way, that what can be the alternatives rather than just demolishing and going into the other. And I think I value that. And again, I'm saying the management of the continuity is very important, that what should go and what should remain. And not to see built heritage as a product, but how the process, how the life, how the people, the importance of the places, the rituals, streets, and other are, and how we can really integrate that, as Professor Ribeiro has said currently, in a local planning process, but within an overall framework of the development plan. And I think this book, where the mosaics of case studies from various things, is actually comes with really enable us and enrich us to find new ways, new alternatives, and open it out again for discussion. Thank you.
Dennis, would you like to go next?
Well, first of all, I'd like to start by thanking the editors and everybody else for welcoming me in this party, because I've been greatly enjoyed it. Also, I was given an opportunity to write about Liverpool. I have written about Indian cities elsewhere, but it was appropriate that I should be writing not about Indian cities in this book. One of the things, Dive and others were working with me on our World Heritage. One of the things that strikes me is that we are at the change in certain times. 75th anniversary of India, the almost changeover in world's most populous country from China to India, the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention, and a number of other factors, which gives us an opportunity for thinking, reflecting, and seeing where we go the next 50 years, or at least to project where we are for the next 10 years. And there are a lot of opportunities which arise. If you look back on the documentations of UNESCO, you will find that the word heritage was not used in the 1945 UNESCO Constitution. The word was inheritance. Now, I draw a clear distinction between the word inheritance, which is unselective, and the selective word, increasingly selective word, specialist word of heritage. And I think we need to realize that we are in a question of the Sustainable Development Goals, and the question of selective survival, which may have been perceived as being relevant in 1972, is not necessarily relevant in 2000 as we approach the second quarter of the 21st century. So there are certain sea changes that we need to bear in mind. Also, as I think it was Smita mentioned, the Gustavo Eucalipto's seminal book was really sectored into different aspects of heritage: culture, nature, tangible, intangible. These do not apply, as Dive and others discussed in our World Heritage last year. These are not universal divisions. These are ones that need to be relooked at, because why are we trying to pretend urban heritage is about urban settlement? It's about people. Why are we dividing the notion of urban heritage into tangible and intangible when they're inescapably interlinked, and where the materials that are used for constructing Historic cities, historic buildings are actually natural. So the divisions, we have an opportunity to relook at these. So I don't want to say too much, but I want to thank you for welcoming me. My view is that India needs to be India and not to be following the precepts which have come from colonial powers and from the what was called the global north, maybe still is. That the most populous country in the world should not be following the precepts that were established in other continents, in other ages, when sustainability was not a question, when the population, when I was born, was 1/3 of what it is today, less than 1/3 the global population when I was born, just a few weeks after Indian independence. So we have an opportunity, and a range of issues are raised in different parts of this book. Gustavo very rightly pointed to Article 5 of the World Heritage Convention. Poonam has referred to I think it was Poonam who referred to Carl Elefante's well-known quotes that the most sustainable building is the one that has already been built. And every existing building is of great value as a carbon neutral heritage resource. We have a whole series of opportunities to relook, to re-question, and to focus on continuity, not on change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Kirtee Ravindran, I would invite you next to briefly share your thoughts on the book.
Thank you. I just want to say, I want to congratulate both Vinayak and Poonam, as well as Kirtee Bhai and his outfit, including you, to have actually brought this book out. I think this is for the first time that the entire length and breadth of the country has been traversed, and the multiple streams of ideas which exist in India have been brought out in between two covers. I think this is a commendable job. It's never been done, because always we have assumed that thought leadership lie in INTAC or UNESCO or ICOMOS or some of these institutions. But actually, in India, it also exists in multiple centers. In every metropolitan city, every state has its own thought process. And I think this book, for the first time, has brought into focus those variations in ideas about the city and conservation. So this is a very, very commendable job. And the format of the book is also very nice. It's friendly, it's informal, and it's the kind of book that you can wake up and read. And you're not intimidated by its format and its heaviness and so on. And also the graphics contribute quite well, quite strongly to this lightness of being, which the book has. And it requires to be discovered. This book requires to be discovered. It's not just a set of things which are put together, but it reflects the complete plurality of thinking that exists in India. And I think that's why this book is perhaps a milestone in my view. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirtee Ravindran ji. And now to open it up to Divya and Ravindra ji.
Thank you, Ujjwala. And I will also like to reflect what Kirtee said. Poonam and Vinayak, thank you for this book. You were very kind to sort of read and reread all the things in the article, checked them very meticulously, and even suggested things to support. And like I think Kirtee said, that this is a wonderful book and it really transverses several topics, streams that heritage confronts, the challenges that heritage confronts in India. And I was very happy to hear Kirtee saying that his next book going to be on urban economics. And I feel that, which I have also said in my short note, that we should also work on heritage economics. You know, I mean, only 2 days back, I was in a lecture by one Dr. Sagar at English Heritage. They've really developed this heritage capital framework where they now are able to prove, I think, borrowing from SDGs, borrowing from the jobs it creates, the carbon footprint it saves. They're able to quantify how conserving heritage is actually 25% cost or even sometimes less than really building new. So if you're able to quantify these things, I think our efforts to conserve these buildings will be far more supported. And I mean, lastly, I'll also say, which I sort of said a little bit in my note, is I think the way heritage is seen in India is also really related to our nation building. You know, we were always set up on a foundation of modernism, where I think traditionalism was consciously or unconsciously relegated. And that is why I think the bedrock of heritage is very, very weak in our country, unlike where in Western countries post-war or in the US, where though I think some of the challenges are the same, but at least they have some sort of a bedrock of heritage. That bedrock of heritage is really missing in our country. And so that's why you see what Professor Ribeiro was also saying. I mean, 94 was when the Bombay regulation was accepted. Today, there are only 5 after, I think 94 was like almost 30 years ago. Only 5 cities have that regulation in place today. I mean, that is like 1 city per 5 years. So a lot of these things don't get replicated because they're not really, the heritage is not really mainstreamed in our framework. And that is where I think all the problems lies. Nizamuddin again is a wonderful example, but it remains as an isolated example. I mean, why are there not hundreds of Nizamuddins happening if it was such an, I mean, it is an important, successful example of heritage revitalization, but it's hardly replicated elsewhere. And I think that is why I think we really look at heritage in a much broader framework. We tend to talk among ourselves. That is my problem. We have not involved economists. We have not involved environmentalists to be able to give the ecological data for our heritage building. And I think till we, lastly, till we see sustainability or culture as the 4th pillar and not a beam, like I had said, that problem will still lie. And with that, I think we, I mean, I hope this book will be able to question or make this impact in people questioning that heritage is important and how we can go about it. Some of the solutions will come out of this book. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Divya. I'll pass over the mic to Ravindraji.
So congrats to everyone involved. I must confess, I'm yet to read the book. I just glanced through that. And I've just made elaborate notes on the right while I was listening. So these are my 2 bits, literally, that you can read at leisure. It's a nice thing to write a book. And book is a nice method of, like it'll become a nice mirror to the past in future. So I'm looking at it in, say, maybe 20 years later. So I would look at this as the next generation I'm very excited about, who are very techno-savvy, and they have what was possibly missing in about 1990s when we were talking about conservation and groping in the dark, etc. So now this generation are there and they're driving. And I guess in about some years later, as I've noted here, there'll be some sort of a consolidation of these thoughts in a transition that the country is going through, from incomplete transition, as I wrote, from the feudal past to the some sort of democratic understanding of how do we work together. So we have left the past, but we have not joined the future. So this is where the excitement is, where the next generation of the youth who matter, who would be looking at this as a how we goofed up, or we did a few things, etc., etc. Thank you so much. Have a lovely time.
Thank you so much, Ravindraji. I would finally like to invite both the editors for the closing comments to first introduce Vinayak. He's a practicing urban designer and city planner based in LA, and an adjunct professor in the School of Architecture at the University of Southern California. His projects include numerous revitalization plans and conservation studies for historic towns in the United States, Panama, Mexico, China, Egypt, and India. He's the director of the India Netherlands-based think tank MyLiveableCity. And
Ujjwala, I think that's
all right.
I think we can move on. We're getting late. I just want to say a few brief things. Well, first of all, beyond the obvious thank yous that everyone has given, I think I just want to give a special thank you to Ujjwala, not only for being the person that has held us together today, but also for working on this book. At the end of the day, you know, we need someone to do all the hard work. And Ujjwala, you need to be in the limelight at this moment and accept that limelight. So thank you from at least the bottom of my heart. And I know I speak for Poonam as well. I just want to say one thing very briefly. For me, this book is a collaborative symbol of the coming of age of, I think, a incredible ancient culture, but a relatively young nation that is now 75 years old. And I'm saying this because for me, it was always unconvincing as a student, always, that the search for so-called Indian identity happened through buildings. And I found that very convincing in my early years, but less and less so as I matured into the field, because I realized that all of the allied fields and the incredible voices that were shaping complex commentaries on the built environment, people like Edgar, Anaji, K.T. Ravindran, all of them were not placed and not there on the same platform in terms of the impact they were having, the impact they should be having in terms of how Indian cities were genuinely being run and governed and administered on a daily basis. And I've always felt that architects with a capital A dominated the scene, perhaps because their buildings were easy and visible and noticeable, versus all the deeper and mature dialogues that took time for people to sit down and digest. And I think this book, to me, is neither the first nor will it be the last, thankfully. There have been books like this before, and hopefully there'll be many more to come. But I believe this book is a wonderful celebration and a tribute to many minds that we have acknowledged at the end of the book, and many others who are sitting right here, who have continued their efforts tirelessly behind the scenes, who have never stopped working to make the Indian city, all the success stories that we've seen. And in that sense, I just feel wonderful that Poonam and I have had this opportunity to give you all a small platform to celebrate all the incredible efforts that you have done. You know, we don't talk about the successes that we have had, but all of you here today, many of the seniors who are sitting here today, in every way are really the foundations on which we are going to go forward. So thank you to all of you. And hopefully this will lead to many more dialogues in the future.
Thank you so much, Vinayak. Finally, over to you, Poonam.
So born in the late 60s in India, basically, and that I think I share with most of the authors. No television. So not surprisingly, my most cherished memories is of bedtime stories that my grandfather regaled us on our yearly vacations. Our favorite was The Elephant and the Blindfold Thief. These stories were retold, never repeated. So he had us often in wonder and in splits with blindfolded men, children, women, ministries, ministers, and even kings, describing the proverbial E for elephant, which every 3-year-old Indian child learns to recognize. Or so we thought. And this year, with the movie Elephant Whisperers, we all learned so much more. Today for me, E is for planet Earth, C is for carbon footprint, and B is the built environment. And the lexicons may have changed, but the prismatic context demands a rethink, not just in how and what we build and say, but also the very foundations of how we learn, teach, and practice. The pandemic lockdown brought us the freedom to choose our rooms. But then I discovered the silos have persisted. Curated a knowledge series for an institution on a broad theme of heritage economy, which I sincerely thought would intrigue the students of architecture, planning, and conservation, but realized that the series was perceived as relevant only to the latter. Not even the faculty from the others could find time to tune in. So when one fine morning, I received a text, Poonam, I have suggested your name to INHAF to curate a webinar on conservation. I knew this will have to be different. And by the time Kirtee ji called me, I already knew it will not be one webinar. It will have to be a diverse conversation and thus will need to be a collaboration. So I threw my net wide and far, and fortunately, Vinayak said yes instantly. And so did our 27 authors subsequently. And hence this book, which could be manifested only under the umbrella of rethink, which is now a necessity, rethink. Listening to our panelists today, it does feel that together we may have succeeded in taking that proverbial first step towards a collective ideation that is becoming urgent as we are now indeed the biggest democracy in the world, which is at 1.2 or 1.4 billion, which is 4 times the population of the US, on 1/4 the land, with 6 climatic zones. Thus, the E of embodied energy, ecology, equality, economy will require C of culture, of collaborative process, and a broad understanding that conservation is climate action. As we all know, there is no planet B. My heartfelt gratitude to all of you to have joined in this entire journey. And I second Vinayak in appreciating as well, thanking Ujjwala and Kirtee ji for us to be all here together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Poonam. Thank you all for joining in. And I think we can all see the amazing effort.
Can I come in for a second, Ujjwala?
Please, Kirtee ji, go ahead.
Not the last word, but I essentially wanted to tell you that by chance we got into this journey of looking at heritage and the country. I wanted to tell you, all of you, that I'm going to surprise you in the next few weeks by sending you a letter that we are working on a genuine bottom-up conservation idea. And we call it people's not only heritage, is people's kind of affinity heritage. I've already talked to Vinayak and he's promised me that we'll work together on this, but let me tell you just in a half a minute what it is. There are a large number of small structures in our villages, in our small towns and our cities. And in fact, we wrote a letter to the Prime Minister talking about a Haveli of Kavi Kalapi, which collapsed last year, reminding him that if people knew about this Haveli collapsing, believe me, they will not require ASI, they will not require a professor, they will not require anyone, they would support its non-destruction. So these are the heritage structure that people love. And we do not have any institutional structure in the country to look after this non-spectacular, non-monumental, non-big building monuments. We want to examine possibility of what could be done in terms of developing suitable institutional arrangement, really bottom-up, controlled and managed by people and supported by people. For whatever it is worth, you will receive a small letter from me in the next 2 or 3 weeks, essentially sharing with what we written to Prime Minister and get your ideas in terms of how do we get going. So this is not the end in that sense. This is the beginning of the second chapter that we want to start with you. And I think it's a very, very important, meaningful chapter because it's truly, truly bottom up. It's not a figure of speech. It is not it's truly bottom up. That's all I could say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kirtee ji. I think we can now finally end. Thank you all for joining in. Thank you to all the authors who've contributed, all the audience who have come here today. I hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Smita. Thank you, Dawa.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trudi. Thank you very much,
Bye, everyone. Good to see you.
Edgar, Vinayak, Poonam ji, Sanmitra ji,
Bye, guys. See you later.
Ravindra Saab,
Thank you.
Kirtee, thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Trudi.
I like what you say. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you, Smita.
Smita,
And thank you, Edgar.
Bye-bye. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Edgar, take care.
Yeah.